Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the lamplit cobblestone streets of Ottoman Istanbul, somewhere deep in the 16th century, where the city never quite goes silent, and you are the reason why. The minarets have just released the last call of the evening into the cooling air, and you can feel the weight of your wooden staff in your hand, a solid, reassuring thunk against the stone every few paces. Somewhere behind you, a cat knocks over a clay pot. Somewhere ahead, a torch flickers in a doorway. And in your chest, a very specific kind of dread is quietly blooming, because your shift does not end until the sun rises over the Bosphorus, and right now the sun is extremely far away. You are a bekçi, a night watchman, one of the thousands of men employed across the Ottoman Empire to patrol the mahalle, the neighborhood quarters, after dark, watching for fire, thieves, unlocked gates, and the general chaos that cities tend to generate when respectable people go to sleep. It is an honorable job, a necessary job, and on most nights, a profoundly, existentially boring job. You probably won't survive this, not the danger, which is real enough, but the particular psychological siege of trying to stay awake for 8 consecutive hours while the entire city breathes slowly around you, and the darkness hums like a lullaby.
So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are watching this from somewhere interesting, drop your location and local time in the comments below. There is something deeply wonderful about knowing that someone in Montevideo or Osaka or Oslo is also refusing to sleep tonight. You are all honorary bekçi as far as I am concerned. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Ottoman Empire at its height was one of the most administratively sophisticated states on earth, and that sophistication extended into the night. Most empires, if we are honest, sort of gave up on their cities after dark, threw a few guards at the gates and hoped for the best. The Ottomans did not do this. They built an entire parallel civic infrastructure for the nighttime hours, and at the center of that infrastructure was the bekçi, equipped with his staff, his lamp, and crucially, magnificently, historically significantly, his relationship with coffee. Coffee had arrived in Istanbul around 1555, and the city had responded with the particular enthusiasm of a population that had perhaps been waiting for exactly this substance without knowing it. The first kafehane, coffee houses, opened near the Grand Bazaar, and within a decade there were hundreds of them scattered across the city. Historians still argue whether coffee spread through Istanbul primarily as a social phenomenon or as a medicinal one, with some scholars insisting the early Ottoman medical establishment viewed it with deep suspicion, and others pointing to records suggesting physicians recommended it for digestive complaints and mental clarity. What everyone agrees on is that it spread fast, and that it spread everywhere, and that by the time you are lacing up your sandals for the night watch in the late 16th century, coffee is not a novelty anymore. It is a fact of life, as ordinary and essential as bread.
What is less ordinary is what it means for you specifically, standing at the edge of your patrol route as the last of the evening light dissolves. Because the kafehane, that social miracle of the Ottoman world, does not operate on the same hours as the hammam or the market. Some of them stay open late, some of them in the larger neighborhoods stay open very late indeed, and you, the bekçi, have a professional relationship with these establishments that is equal parts civic duty, personal necessity, and something that modern observers might generously describe as a mutually beneficial arrangement. Your patrol covers perhaps 8 or 10 city blocks, winding through residential streets, past the courtyard walls of mosques, alongside the shuttered fronts of workshops and stalls. Every city in the empire has its own rhythm, but Istanbul's night has a particular texture. The smell of the Bosphorus threading through the alleyways, the distant sound of water from the great cisterns, the occasional argument from an upper window that stops as quickly as it starts. You carry your lamp low to conserve the flame, and you tap your staff against the cobblestones at irregular intervals, partly as as a signal to would-be troublemakers that someone is watching, and partly, if you are honest, to keep yourself anchored to the physical world. The Bekçi system was formalized under Suleiman the Magnificent, whose reign from 1520 to 1566 represented something of a golden age for Ottoman civic organization. Under Suleiman's administration, neighborhoods were assigned specific watchmen who were legally accountable for crimes that occurred on their patrol routes during their shifts, a quirky and mildly terrifying policy that meant your personal financial well-being was directly tied to whether thieves chose your street or someone else's. This incentive structure, which modern economists would probably find fascinating and you find simply stressful, ensured that Bekçi took their roots seriously. You were not a passive observer of the night. You were its custodian, its guarantor, its responsible adult. And responsible adults, as it turns out, needed coffee. The relationship between the night watch and the coffee house was not accidental. The kahvehane functioned during daylight hours as a gathering place for merchants, scholars, poets, and the simply unemployed, a democratic space where, famously, a man could sit for hours over a single cup without being asked to leave, listening to storytelling, music, or the passionate arguments about theology and politics that the Ottoman authorities periodically tried to suppress and periodically gave up suppressing. But as evening deepened into night, the character of the coffee house shifted. The daytime crowd thinned, the storytellers packed up, and a different kind of regular began to appear, men whose work began precisely when everyone else's ended.
You are one of them. You know the proprietor of the kahvehane on the corner of your route by his first name, and he knows your order, and there is a specific small table near the window that is understood through the unspoken social contracts that govern all such establishments to be yours during the hours between the second and fourth watch. You will stop there twice on a good night, once on a busy one, and in extreme circumstances, a winter patrol, a festival night when the streets are unexpectedly crowded, you will stop 3 times, each cup a small tactical decision in the longer campaign of remaining upright and functional until dawn. The city breathes around you as you walk, and the coffee breathes with it, and somehow, improbably, magnificently, this is enough.
The kahvehane at the second hour of the night is a different creature entirely from the one you walked past this afternoon, and you have come to love it, the way you love all things that reveal their true nature only in the dark. The lamps inside burn lower than they do during the day, partly to save oil, partly because the men who remain at this hour are not here to read or to conduct business or to be seen. They are here to exist quietly in the company of other people who are also, for various reasons, not sleeping. The storyteller's cushioned platform in the corner sits empty, the elaborate brass tray he uses as a prop still gleaming faintly in the lamplight, like a prop left on a stage after the audience has gone home. The backgammon boards are folded. The daytime noise has settled into something softer and more honest. You push open the door and the smell hits you first, as it always does. Roasted coffee so deeply embedded in the walls and the cushions and the very air of this room that you suspect it would linger for decades, even if the proprietor stopped brewing tomorrow. It is not a sharp smell, not at this hour. During the day, when the fire is high and the grinding is constant and 20 cups are being prepared at once, the kahvehane smells aggressive, almost confrontational. Now it smells like memory, like something your grandfather did in a back room of a house you can barely picture anymore. You step inside, nod at Mehmet, the proprietor, a compact and permanently unsurprised man of about 50 who has seen everything the night has to offer and elected to find most of it mildly amusing, and settle into your corner. There are 4 other men in the room. You know 2 of them by sight. Yusuf, who patrols the quarter to the east of yours and has the enviable quality of never appearing tired regardless of the hour, and an older Bekçi whose name you have never learned, but who is called by everyone, including himself, Dede, meaning grandfather, because he has been doing this job since before most of your colleagues were born. The other 2 are not watchmen.
One appears to be a baker, given the flour still caught in the creases of his elbows, and the other is a mystery, sitting in the far corner with the particular stillness of a man who is either deeply at peace or deeply asleep with his eyes open. You have seen both in this room and learned not to assume.
The kahvehane as an institution was, historically speaking, one of the Ottoman Empire's most radical social inventions, and it is worth pausing for a moment to appreciate just how strange and wonderful it was. In a society with rigid class structures and elaborate protocols governing who could speak to whom and in what context, the coffee house operated as a kind of neutral territory. Grand viziers were known to visit incognito, janissaries sat alongside tradesmen, poets argued with butchers. The space enforced its own democracy through the simple mechanism of the coffee itself. Everyone's cup was the same, everyone paid the same price, everyone sat on the same low cushions. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman authorities' periodic attempts to close the coffeehouses were primarily motivated by concern about seditious political conversation, or by the more prosaic worry that men were spending time in coffeehouses instead of at mosque. But either way, the closures never stuck for long, because the kahvehane had become too essential to daily life, and nightly life, to be legislated out of existence. Mehmet sets your cup in front of you without being asked, and you wrap both hands around it even though the night is not particularly cold, because there is something about holding a warm cup in the dark that satisfies a need that has nothing to do with temperature. The coffee is thick, the way Ottoman coffee always is, not filtered, not diluted, the ground still settling slowly at the bottom of the small cup, like a dark sediment of the day. You do not drink it immediately. This is important. This is in fact one of the unwritten rules of the night kahvehane, which differ from the daytime rules in ways that are never articulated but universally understood. You let it sit. You let it cool slightly. You breathe it in. The ritual of the waiting is part of what the coffee does for you, and you know this even if you would not use the word ritual. You would just say that a man who gulps his coffee in a hurry is a man who has forgotten what coffee is for. What coffee is for at the second hour of the night watch is this. It is for the maintenance of a particular quality of attention, not the sharp, anxious alertness of a man who has had too much of something. That kind of wakefulness is its own problem, sending you skittering through your patrol in a state of jangled nerves that makes you see threats in every shadow. What you need, and what a properly prepared cup of Ottoman coffee provides when approached with the correct patience, is a gentle elevation of awareness, a smoothing out of the fog without the introduction of static. You remain calm, you remain warm, at least internally, and you remain, crucially, awake.
Youssef slides onto the cushion across from you without asking, because this is also understood. The night watch is a solitary profession in its operational requirements, but a communal one in its emotional needs, and the kahvehane is where those two facts make their peace with each other. You exchange the minimal greeting of two men who have said everything important to each other already, and now exist in a comfortable conversational shorthand. He mentions a disturbance near the tannery, probably nothing, a dog, maybe someone's goat having an existential crisis at midnight, which happens more than civilians suspect. You mention the gate on the eastern wall that has been hanging slightly open for 3 nights now, and that you have reported twice without visible result. This is the administrative texture of your working life, and you discuss it in the same tone most people use to discuss the weather, not with complaint exactly, but with the weary appreciation of professionals who understand that their world contains many things that cannot be fixed, only monitored. The quirky reality of the Ottoman coffeehouse's role in night watch culture is that it was never officially sanctioned. There is no imperial decree establishing the kahvehane as a rest station for bekçi. There are no records of neighborhood administrators formally authorizing the arrangement. It simply evolved, organically and practically, because the needs of the night watch and the capabilities of the all-night coffeehouse aligned with the elegant logic of 2 puzzle pieces that happened to fit. Proprietors like Mehmet benefited from the steady, reliable custom of men who would always show up and always pay, however modestly. Bekçi benefited from a warm, lit, socially acceptable reason to pause their patrol that was not sleeping in a doorway, which was technically a dismissible offense. The city benefited from watchmen who were actually awake. Everyone in the Ottoman vocabulary of such arrangements was satisfied. Dede, from his cushion near the brazier, says something in a voice so low it barely qualifies as speech. You have learned to listen for it regardless, because Dede's quiet pronouncements have a way of being either deeply wise or completely absurd,
and the gap between the two is itself a kind of entertainment during the long hours. Tonight he says that a man who cannot enjoy sitting still has not yet made peace with being alive, and you consider this for longer than you expected to, turning your cup slowly in your hands as the grounds continue their patient descent to the bottom. Outside, the city makes its nighttime sounds, the distant bark of a dog taken up and dropped by another, the creak of a shutter in a rising wind, the particular silence of a street that has decided for now to behave itself. Your lamp sits on the table beside you, trimmed and ready. Your staff leans against the wall. In 20 minutes, or perhaps 30, the night kafihane does not run on clocks, which is part of its genius. You will stand, collect your things, exchange a nod with Mehmed, and step back out into the dark. But not yet, not quite yet. Right now there is the cup, and the warmth, and the low hum of men who are all, in their different ways, keeping watch over the same sleeping city. You take your first sip. It is exactly the right temperature now.
The coffee you are drinking did not arrive in your cup easily, and if you trace it backward through the chain of hands and hours that produced it, you end up somewhere in Yemen, on the terraced hillsides above the port of Mocha, where the plant was first cultivated for trade, and where the beans still carry, in the opinion of serious Ottoman coffee drinkers, a quality that nothing grown elsewhere has quite managed to replicate. You have never been to Yemen. You have never seen a coffee plant in the ground, but you know the bean the way a carpenter knows a particular grain of wood, by what it does when you work with it, by the way it responds to heat and time and patience, by the small variations in color and texture that tell you whether this batch will be excellent or merely adequate. Working the night watch for 7 years will teach you things about coffee that most people never learn, because most people drink coffee as a pleasure, and you drink it as a tool, and tools reward close attention. The process that produced your cup began yesterday, or possibly the day before, depending on Mehmet's restocking schedule and the particular rhythm of the roasting operation he runs in the small courtyard behind the kafehane. The green beans arrive at the market in burlap sacks that smell of ship and distance, and Mehmet or his assistant, a teenage boy of spectacular sullenness who nonetheless performs his duties with mechanical precision, will sort through them with practiced fingers, pulling out anything split or discolored, holding individual beans up to the light with the critical squint of a jeweler examining a stone. This sorting is not decorative. A bad bean in an Ottoman preparation is a much more consequential thing than a bad bean in a modern filtered brew, where the sheer volume of water dilutes individual flaws into irrelevance. In a cup that holds perhaps 3 tablespoons of liquid in total, one wrong bean can shift the entire flavor profile into something bitter and wrong, and a bekçi drinking a wrong cup at the 3rd hour of the night is a bekçi who is going to have a very unpleasant 40 minutes before the bitterness settles.
The roasting happens over open flame in a long-handled pan called a tandir, and it is one of the great sensory events of the neighborhood, whether or not you have ever consciously registered it as such. If you have walked past Mehmet's courtyard in the late afternoon, you have smelled it, that particular progression from grassy and vegetal through nutty and warm to the deep, almost smoky richness that signals the beans are approaching readiness. The roaster, if he is skilled, never leaves the pan unattended and never stops moving it, because the difference between perfectly roasted and irreparably burned is measured in seconds and in the particular shade of brown that exists between mahogany and darkness. Mehmet is skilled. You know this because his coffee does not taste burned, and because burned coffee at 3 in the morning, when you have 4 hours of patrol remaining, is one of the minor tragedies of the watchman's existence. The grinding follows the roasting, and this is where the ritual quality of Ottoman coffee preparation becomes impossible to ignore, even if you are the sort of practically minded person who normally resists the word ritual. The beans are ground in a cylindrical brass mill, a jezve's companion, a piece of equipment that most serious kafehane owners treated with something approaching reverence, keeping it clean and correctly adjusted with a consistency they did not always apply to their own persons.
The grind must be fine, not espresso fine in the modern sense, but fine enough that the resulting powder, when you rub it between your fingers, leaves no perceptible grit, just a smooth, slightly oily darkness that stains the skin and smells extraordinary. Too coarse a grind and the coffee brews weak and flat, sliding through the water without leaving enough of itself behind. Too fine and it turns muddy and harsh, the cup becoming something you endure rather than enjoy. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman preference for very fine grinding was primarily a practical adaptation to the jezve brewing method, or whether it reflected an aesthetic philosophy about the relationship between coffee and water. Some scholars suggesting that Ottoman coffee culture developed an almost philosophical literature around the question of extraction, the idea that coffee, like truth, reveals itself only when approached with sufficient patience and the correct degree of pressure. What is not disputed is that the grinding technique spread westward with Ottoman influence and became foundational to every subsequent coffee tradition in Europe, which means that every espresso pulled in Rome and every Turkish coffee served in Vienna carries somewhere in its ancestry the muscle memory of a brasa mill turning in a courtyard in Istanbul.
The water goes into the sezve cold. This is the detail that surprises most people who have not watched Ottoman coffee being made with attention, because the intuition is to add hot water to ground coffee, the way you might make tea and get on with things. But Ottoman preparation reverses this. The cold water and the grounds go in together, and the whole mixture is brought up to temperature slowly over a heat source that in Mehmet's kafahane consists of a tray of fine sand set above a low brazier. The sand distributes heat so evenly and so gently that the coffee never reaches a full boil, or rather it approaches boiling with a kind of theatrical slowness, a foam rising toward the lip of the sezve, swelling and trembling, requiring the maker's full attention and a steady hand to remove it from the heat at precisely the right moment, just before the foam collapses and the liquid beneath begins its rolling boil that would ruin everything. This moment, the foam at its peak, the sezve held over the sand, the maker watching with complete concentration, is the hinge point of the entire ritual, and it is where you have seen Mehmet display something that in a more dramatic profession would be called heroism, and in the coffee trade is called expertise. He reads the foam the way you read a dark street, not looking at it directly, but taking in its whole character, the texture and colour and movement of it, the way it thickens at the edges before the centre, the particular shimmer that tells him the temperature beneath has reached the threshold without crossing it. You have tried to describe this skill to people who do not make coffee, and found that you cannot. It is the kind of knowledge that lives in the hands and eyes rather than in language. Sometimes the process is done twice. The sezve returned to the sand after the first foam rise, allowed to approach the threshold again, creating a double-foamed cup that is richer and more complex than a single-pass brew. Mehmet does this for his preferred customers without being asked, and for everyone else if they know to request it. You are, needless to say, a double foam customer, and have been for years, and this small fact contains within it the entire social architecture of the night kavahane, the way repeated presence and reliable custom accumulate into a form of relationship that is not quite friendship and not quite commerce, but something the Ottomans, with their characteristic precision about social categories, would have had a specific word for.
The cup that arrives in front of you is small enough to hide in your fist, a delicate thing, often ceramic, sometimes with a decorative zarfi, a metal holder that protects your fingers from the heat and the cup from being crushed by hands that spend their nights gripping a wooden staff. You do not drink from the zarfi, obviously. It is a holder, not a vessel, but the weight of it in your palm, the slight give of the metal against your grip, is part of what makes the pause feel like a pause, rather than just a stop. You are holding something that required craft to produce and craft to fill, and even your exhausted, patrol-worn brain registers this as meaningful in some way it cannot fully articulate. The grounds do not disappear when you drink. They settle, as mentioned, to the bottom, and they stay there, and when you finish a cup of Ottoman coffee, you are left with a small dark residue that the more imaginatively inclined of your colleagues believe can be read as a map of the future. This practice, tasseography, the reading of coffee grounds, was already well established in Ottoman culture by your era, and it occupies a peculiar space between folk superstition and genuine social ritual.
You yourself are skeptical of it as a predictive tool, but you appreciate it as a conversational one. There is something useful about having a structured excuse to look at something small and quiet together with another person and talk about what you see. It makes the pause feel purposeful. It gives the cup a second life after the coffee itself is gone. And you need that second life, because the cup is small and the night is long, and every extra minute in the warm light of the kahvehane is a minute you have negotiated away from the dark and the cold and the cobblestones. The brew itself, bean by bean, hand by hand, heat by careful heat, has given you something more than caffeine. It has given you a reason to be still, to be present, to inhabit a moment fully before returning to the long vigilance of the watch. And that, when you are a bekçi 7 years into a career of dark streets and uncertain nights, is worth more than you can easily say.
The cardamom arrives in your cup without announcement, the way the best things tend to arrive, already there, already doing its work, integrated so completely into the flavor that separating it from the coffee would be like trying to separate the cold from the night air. Mehmet adds it during the grinding, a small quantity of the pale green pods crushed alongside the beans in the brass mill, and the result is something that the coffee alone could not produce, a warmth that sits slightly above the warmth of the liquid itself, a brightness at the back of the throat that lingers after the cup is finished and keeps the world feeling slightly more vivid than it did before. You have drunk coffee without cardamom in other neighborhoods, in other kahvehane run by proprietors with different philosophies, and it is fine, it is coffee, but it is not this. And this is what you have come to need on a long watch, which tells you something about the difference between a substance and a ritual. Cardamom was not the only thing that went into Ottoman coffee, and this is where the history of your cup gets complicated in ways that are genuinely interesting and occasionally alarming. The Ottoman Empire sat at the intersection of every major spice trade route in the known world, which meant that the kahvehane proprietors of Istanbul had access to an extraordinary pharmacopoeia of potential additives, and the more entrepreneurial among them were not shy about experimenting. Cinnamon was common, a dusting of it on the foam of a freshly poured cup, adding a sweetness that the coffee itself lacked, and that the Ottoman palate, with its sophisticated relationship to dessert and confection, found deeply satisfying. Cloves appeared occasionally, though their intensity required a careful hand. Too much clove in a coffee cup produces something that tastes less like a beverage and more like a dental procedure. Mastic, the resinous sap of a tree grown primarily on the Greek island of Chios, which the Ottomans controlled and prized so highly that unauthorized export of mastic was at certain points a capital offense, found its way into coffee cups in some establishments, adding a faintly piney, faintly sweet quality that divided opinions sharply among drinkers, most of whom either loved it immediately or never came back.
You have opinions about all of these. 7 years of night watch coffee consumption has made you opinionated about things that daylight people never think about, and you have learned that this is both a professional asset and a social liability, because once you start explaining to someone why mastic coffee requires a specific temperature to express its best qualities, you have lost them, and you can see in their eyes the gentle recalibration of how interesting they thought you were going to be. The more serious question, the one that floats around the edges of kahvehane conversation like smoke that nobody wants to acknowledge directly, is what else might have gone into coffee during this era, and here the history gets genuinely murky in ways that historians find fascinating, and that you, as a person who drinks the results, find somewhat motivating to investigate. There were, in the Ottoman world, a number of substances believed to promote wakefulness and mental clarity that we would today classify with varying degrees of concern. Certain preparations of opium were used medicinally and recreationally across the empire, and their relationship to coffee culture is one of those topics where the historical record is simultaneously rich in rumor and frustratingly thin in documentation. Historians still argue whether the practice of adding small quantities of opium-derived preparations to coffee was widespread, localized, or primarily a moral panic propagated by Ottoman authorities who wanted a reason to justify coffeehouse closures, without admitting that the real reason was political anxiety about what people discussed over their cups.
What the records do confirm is that the Ottoman medical tradition, rooted in the humoral theories inherited from ancient Greek medicine and substantially developed by Islamic scholars, viewed coffee itself as a pharmacological substance with specific effects on the body's balance of humors, not merely a pleasant drink. The great Ottoman physician Khatib Chelebi wrote about coffee in the 17th century with the careful analytical attention of a man documenting a drug rather than a beverage, noting its effects on digestion, sleep, and mental
acuity with the same systematic interest he brought to everything else. This framing, coffee as medicine, coffee as intervention, coffee as a substance whose properties needed to be understood and managed rather than simply enjoyed, shaped the entire culture around how it was prepared and consumed, and it explains why additives were not seen as adulteration but as refinement, as the careful tuning of a preparation to produce a specific desired effect. For a night watchman, the desired effect was specific and practical. You did not need euphoria. You did not need the racing, fractured alertness of someone who has had too much of something stimulating. That kind of wakefulness was, as mentioned, its own problem on a dark patrol, where clear judgment could be the difference between correctly identifying a drunk merchant stumbling home and catastrophically misidentifying a city official doing the same. What you needed was the particular quality of attention that your grandmother, if she had been the philosophizing type, might have called presence, the state of being fully in your body and your surroundings without anxiety, alert without tension, awake without the jittery edge that tips into paranoia somewhere around the 4th consecutive hour of darkness. Cardamom, the serious herbalists of the Ottoman world believed, contributed to exactly this quality. It was classified as warming and slightly stimulating, without the sharp edge of, say, black pepper or ginger, both of which also made appearances in various coffee preparations and were considered better suited to morning consumption when a more aggressive wakefulness was appropriate. The cardamom-coffee combination was specifically associated in the Ottoman medical literature with sustained, moderate alertness, the kind of attention that could be maintained over hours rather than burned bright and fast. Whether this reflects an accurate understanding of cardamom's pharmacological properties or an elaborate placebo architecture built around a spice that mostly just tastes good is, again, the kind of question that keeps certain historians employed and certain other historians mildly contemptuous of the first group.
What you know, practically and empirically, is that it works, or at least it works well enough, which, in the context of an 8-hour night patrol through streets that are mostly uneventful and occasionally very much not, is a distinction without much difference. You are awake, you are functional, you are, at this particular moment in the warm amber light of Mehmet's cafehane, genuinely content in a way that your daylight self might struggle to access, because the night has a way of clarifying what matters, and the coffee has a way of making the clarity bearable. There is a quirky footnote to the Ottoman coffee additive tradition that Dede told you about on a winter night 2 years ago, delivered in his characteristic tone of absolute certainty about things he had almost certainly embellished beyond recognition. He claimed, and you have found no reason to fully disbelieve him, and several reasons to find it plausible, that certain cafehane in the older districts of Istanbul kept what he called a bekçi blend, a specific preparation made for night watchmen that differed from the standard customer offering in ways that the proprietor would not always disclose. The difference, according to Dede, lay not in illegal or dangerous additives, but in the ratio of beans from different origins, a higher proportion of the most heavily caffeinated Yemeni varieties mixed with smaller quantities of beans from other sources, producing a cup that looked and tasted essentially identical to the standard preparation, but hit differently at the 2nd hour of the night. Whether this represents genuine coffee expertise, elaborate customer relationship management, or the kind of story that improves with retelling in low-lit rooms, is, you feel, not really the point. The point is that the cafehane thought about you, thought about what you needed, built something around your specific requirements as a person whose work began when the city went to sleep. That consideration, that the preparation of your coffee was shaped by the demands of your profession, that the spices and the ratios and the timing of the double foam were calibrated, however imperfectly and intuitively, to the specific challenge of staying gently, sustainably awake through the small and dangerous hours, is something you carry with you back out into the street when you set down your cup and collect your lamp and your staff and step through Mehmet's door into the cooling dark. The cardamom is still at the back of your throat, the warmth of the cup is still in your hands, or the memory of it is, which at this hour amounts to the same thing. The city is quieter now than it was an hour ago, that particular quality of silence that settles over Istanbul somewhere between the second and third watch, when even the insomniacs have given up and gone horizontal. You begin to walk. Your lamp cuts a small, warm circle in the dark ahead of you, and inside that circle the cobblestones are familiar and the shadows are manageable, and the night, which could be many things, is for now simply the place where you do your work. The spices in your blood, or the idea of them, which your body has decided to honor anyway, keep the edges of the world crisp and present. You are here, you are awake, the city is sleeping, and you are watching over it, and somewhere behind you the light in Mehmet's window is still burning, because you will be back, and he knows it, and the coffee is already waiting.
The fourth watch is the hardest. Every Bekçi knows this, and none of them talk about it much, because acknowledging weakness in the small hours feels like inviting it in, and the fourth watch has enough of its own momentum without any encouragement. It begins somewhere around the time the city's deepest sleepers have achieved whatever peace the night is going to give them, and the earliest risers have not yet stirred. That narrow corridor of absolute stillness, where Istanbul holds its breath between one day and the next. The dogs have stopped their conversational barking. The wind has dropped. Your lamp flame burns perfectly vertical in the windless air, a small plumb line connecting you to the earth, and the sound of your staff on the cobblestones is so clear and so solitary that it seems to belong to a different city than the one you patrolled at dusk, when the streets still held the warmth and residue of 10,000 people going about their lives. You make your final stop at Batavehane with the particular awareness of a man who knows this is the last one, that after this cup there is only the long walk home to the conclusion of the night, the slow brightening of the eastern sky over the Bosphorus that begins as a rumour and builds into a certainty over the course of an hour. Mehmet is still there, inevitably, occupying his position behind the preparation area with the stoic permanence of a man who has perhaps never left, and perhaps never intends to. The baker from earlier is gone. Dede is gone, his cushion retaining a slight compression that will be gone by morning. Yusuf is gone. The mysterious man in the corner is gone, resolved at some point in the night into either sleep or departure without you noticing which. There is only you and Mehmet, and the low fire under the sand tray, and the smell of coffee so deeply familiar by now that it has stopped registering as a smell, and become simply the texture of the air in this room.
The last cup is different from the first. Not in its preparation, Mehmet's hands perform the same sequence of actions with the same unhurried precision at the fourth watch as they did at the second. The grounds measured, the water cold, the zezva set into the sand with the same gentle placement of a man who respects what he is doing. The difference is in you, in what you bring to the cup, in the quality of attention you are able to give it after 7 or 8 hours of dark streets and solitary walking. You are tired in a way that has moved past the sharp, resistible tiredness of the early watch and settled into something deeper and more interesting, a softening of the ordinary boundaries between yourself and the world around you, a permeability that makes the warmth of the cup feel more significant than it would at any other hour, and the smell of the cardamom more vivid, and the silence of the room more companionable than silence has any right to be. This is the state you have come to understand that the coffee was always aiming at, not the aggressive wakefulness of the first cup, which was about establishing the possibility of the night, asserting against the body's preference for sleep that the watch would be kept, and the streets would be walked, and the city would have its guardian, whether it appreciated this or not. The last cup is about something quieter. It is about the maintenance of presence in the face of everything that wants to dissolve it, the gentle insistence that you are still here, still watching, still the person the neighborhood is relying on to notice the unlocked gate and the suspicious shadow and the fire that starts small in a courtyard and can consume a block before anyone wakes. The Ottoman coffee ritual, traced across its full arc from the roasting yard to this final pre-dawn cup, turns out to be one of history's more elegant solutions to a genuinely difficult problem. Keeping a human being awake and functionally alert for 8 consecutive hours through the night is not something that any single substance can accomplish reliably, and the Ottomans, with their characteristic sophistication about the relationship between body and environment and social context, seem to have understood this intuitively. The coffee was not enough on its own. The kahvehane was not enough on its own. The cardamom and the ritual preparation and the double foam and the small ceramic cup and the brass zafe and the company of other nighttime men and Dede's impenetrable pronouncements and Mehmet's unsurprised face, all of it together, the entire constellation of practice and place and relationship, was the thing that kept you awake. The coffee was the anchor, the thing you organized the ritual around, but the ritual was larger than the coffee and always had been.
Historians still argue whether the bekçi's relationship with the kahvehane was formally recognized in Ottoman administrative records, or whether it existed entirely in the informal economy of neighborhood life, undocumented and ungoverned, sustained purely by mutual necessity. What the records do show in the account books of certain Istanbul neighborhoods from the 16th and 17th centuries is that kahvehane located on or near major patrol routes showed consistently higher late-night revenues than those in purely residential areas with no watchman traffic. A dry statistical footnote that contains, if you look at it correctly, the entire human story of men and coffee and darkness and the small dignities that make difficult work sustainable. The quirky and genuinely delightful historical footnote to all of this is that the Ottoman night watch coffee culture appears to have influenced the development of the coffeehouse as an institution in ways that spread far beyond the empire's borders. When coffee arrived in Vienna in the late 17th century, brought, according to the most colourful version of the story, from supplies left behind after the Ottoman siege of 1683, the Viennese coffeehouse that emerged from that encounter inherited certain features of the Ottoman kahvehane that had been specifically shaped by its nighttime clientele: the extended hours, the tolerance for long, quiet occupation of a table, the understanding that a coffeehouse was not merely a place to drink coffee, but a place to be, to exist, to maintain a kind of wakeful presence in the world without any particular obligation to justify it. These qualities, which define the Viennese café tradition to this day, and which influence the Parisian café and through it the entire Western coffeehouse culture that eventually produced the place where you may be reading this on your laptop at 11 on a Tuesday night, trace a direct line back to the practical requirements of Ottoman night watchmen who needed somewhere warm and lit and caffeinated to anchor their long patrol. You think about none of this, obviously, sitting with your last cup in Mehmet's kahvehane as the fourth watch begins its slow surrender to the fifth. You are not thinking about cultural legacy or historical influence or the chain of causation that connects your brass café to a café in Paris 3 centuries from now. You are thinking about the gate on the eastern wall that has been hanging open for 3 nights, and whether the tingling in your left knee means rain is coming, and whether Dede's observation about a man at peace with sitting still was wisdom, or just the kind of thing that sounds wise at 2 in the morning and reveals itself as obvious in daylight. You are thinking, with a warmth that has nothing to do with caffeine, about the particular quality of the city of this hour, the way it becomes, briefly, something almost innocent, stripped of its daytime noise and commerce and argument down to its essential self, which is simply a very old place where a very large number of people are trying to live their lives as well as they can manage.
You check the gate on the eastern wall. It is, for the first time in 3 nights, properly latched. You stand in front of it for a moment, lamp held low, and you feel something that is not quite triumph and not quite relief, but lives in the neighborhood of both. The quiet satisfaction of a small thing resolved, a detail attended to, the world slightly more in order than it was. This is the work. This is what the coffee and the kavehane and the cardamom and the ritual and the company of other watchful men in the dark were all in service of in the end. Not wakefulness as an abstract achievement, but wakefulness as a means to this, to noticing to things that need noticing, to being present enough to catch the world in its small moments of disorder and set them gently right. The sky continues its quiet work to the east. You begin your last circuit, staff tapping, lamp swinging its small warm arc across the stones, and the city begins, almost imperceptibly, to stir.
And here, at the edge of the morning, we let the Bekçi walk on without us. You have been with him all night, through the first lamp-lit hour, and the warm corner of the kavehane, and the slow, patient ritual of the jezve over the sand, and the cardamom doing its gentle work, and the long quiet of the fourth watch. And now the sky is doing what skies do, and the city is doing what cities do, and it is time to let both of them get on with it. There is something deeply calming when you think about it from where you are sitting right now, about the unbroken thread that connects that Ottoman night watchman's cup to whatever is in your hand or beside you or recently finished in the kitchen. Across 5 centuries and several continents, and 1,000 variations in preparation and vessel and setting, people have been using coffee to stay gently present in the world, to maintain the particular quality of attention that makes the dark navigable and the long hours bearable. You are part of that tradition, whether you knew it or not when you pressed play tonight. The watch is ending, the city is waking, and you, wherever you are, whatever your local time, whatever the view from your window, have stayed with the story all the way to the edge of the morning, which is its own kind of vigilance, its own small act of keeping watch. Let the Bekçi's last footsteps fade into the cobblestones. Let the kavehane lamp burn down. Let the cardamom settle, warm and quiet, at the back of your throat. The night has been good company, and now, gently, without hurry, without any particular alarm, you can let it go. Sleep well. The city is in good hands. Sweet dreams.